Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to your 8th grade class. Welcome back to another United States history lesson where today we are going to continue talking about the unfortunate presidency of John Adams. Poor John Adams, the man, I gotta say, he got the short end of the stick. He's following Washington. That's a really hard thing to do, and his presidency is not going so well. All right, last time we talked about the XYZ affair where Adams kept the precedent that Washington set by not going to war with France or any other European power, but it really cost him. It cost him a lot. People wanted to go to war with France, and this is going to hurt Adams' reputation. That brings us to today's lesson, which is on the Alien and Sedition Acts. Now, as always, do your best to keep up and take notes. You can always pause the video or slow it down if you need to. So, let's talk about these acts. The Alien and Sedition Acts, which are the acts of when aliens, right? So Martians come down and decide to secede from the Union. No, I'm just kidding. That's not what these terms mean. We'll get to those in a second. Here is an actual copy of an actual newspaper article of the time talking about the Alien and Sedition Acts. Look at this, it's so official. By the authority of the 5th Congress of the United States of America. Yes, it's very official. Now, let's dive into these. Alright, Republicans, aka, Thomas Jefferson, they were criticizing the Federalists for wanting war with France. Alright, and remember, at this time, after the XYZ affair, the Federalists really want to go to war with France. They were very insulted that the French diplomats under Talleyrand demanded all this money to even begin negotiations. It was essentially a bribe. It was extortation. France was saying, pay us this money and we will make this undeclared naval warfare stop. Wait? No. Right, so the Federalists are really wanting war. Adams did not do war, but remember, he did strengthen the military a lot, just in case. Okay, and Republicans are just up in arms. They're saying, yeah, we know what the French did is horrible, like demanding money for diplomacy. That is horrible. But is that worth war? No, the Republicans are going to say. That's not worth war. Remember that the Republicans, who are led by Jefferson, do not want war with France. The Republicans like the French for the most part. Jefferson, of course, himself is very sympathetic to the French. He spent a lot of time there, Secretary of State. He felt we owed the French. He felt that they were kindred spirits in the revolution, but the French have gotten a little lost. And keep in mind, who is Thomas Jefferson at this time? What role does he play? That's right, he is Adams' vice president. So here is a perfect example, ladies and gentlemen, of when we have these political parties who people belong to two different parties as president and vice president. President Adams is a Federalist and his party wants war, and the vice president is a Republican and his party does not want war. So this is going to be very difficult. Now, the Federalists feel like their back is up against the wall here. The country is up in arms. Most people in this country want war with France, and they are feeling that pressure. So the Federalists need to do something. It's not enough to just strengthen the military. They make John Adams, and I should point out that the acts that we're going to talk about today, John Adams was very reluctant to pass these. He really did not like them that much, but eventually he agreed. So, the Federalists need to appear strong. They need to appear like we're doing something. Okay, we can't go to war. We're going to strengthen the military, but what else? We're going to pass the Alien and the Sedition Acts. So, the Federalists, in response to all this criticism, passed the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798. And like I said, the Federalists were trying to seem stronger after the XYZ affair. Because the XYZ affair, it made them look pretty weak. Alright, the France has the audacity to ask the Americans for money, for diplomacy, and yes, we're strengthening the military, but the Federalists want to do something else to make it seem like they're taking this seriously. Now, the Alien and Sedition Acts, what are they? Let's talk about them. These were 4 separate acts, alright? This is not one act. These are 4 separate acts that were essentially a package bundle deal. They were the Naturalization Act, the Alien Enemies Act, the Alien Friends Act, and the Sedition Acts. We're going to talk about them a little bit here, and you're going to have a homework assignment. You're going to have to read a little bit more about these acts because they're very important. And I should say, this is a dark chapter in American history, folks. It really is. Really violates a lot of the First Amendment rights for reasons that you will see soon. But let's just have a brief introduction of these acts. But first, I want to say that an alien is a non. Oh, that's a typo. All right, let's count the typos Mr. Johnson has. That's not a nom-citizen. Nom nom nom, yummy citizen. No. An alien is a non-citizen. It's a foreign person, someone not born in the U.S. An alien are not little green dudes from Mars. Again, that should say green. All right, I kind of made these changes last minute. So aliens are not like space aliens. An alien in this term is a legal term saying you are not a citizen of this country. Okay, so they're people who are not citizens. What is sedition? Sedition essentially means rebellion or resistance. That's what sedition means. So these acts are mostly aimed at foreigners inside the U.S. doing things that might be going against what the government does. Okay, so let's unpack these a little more. First, let's talk about the Alien Acts. And remember, the Alien Acts are two different acts. They are the Alien Enemies Act and the Alien Friends Act. But essentially, these acts together allow the president to deport foreign citizens from the United States on the suspicion of anti-government activities. And like I say, this is aimed at foreigners. This is not aimed at U.S. citizens. Let's take a look at this. Let's read this one more time. The Alien Acts allow the president to deport foreign citizens from the United States on the suspicion of anti-government activities. Alright, so this is a pretty big deal. This is mostly aimed at French people. There was a huge population of French nationals, meaning French citizens, who were living in the United States at this time. And a lot of these people were greatly criticizing the Federalists for wanting to go to war with France. Adams' administration and the Federalists were worried that these people would cause a mini rebellion against the government. There's hundreds of thousands of these French citizens living in the United States. So they're saying, we don't want these Frenchies to sabotage the government. So if we suspect them of doing anti-government activities, we can deport them. An anti-government act, let me just say this really quick. The language in this act is broad, and it's broad on purpose. The more vague you write a law, the more discrepancy the government has in enforcing the law. What would qualify as suspicion? What would qualify as anti-government activities? It doesn't really specifically say too much. And that helps the government because they could say anti-government activity could be anything from actually organizing a militia to do a raid on the White House or just printing as a foreign citizen, like a French citizen living in the U.S., just printing an editorial in the newspaper saying, hey, John Adams and his Federalists, they suck. Yeah, under this, they could say that that is anti-government activities. Again, it's broad, which helps the government enforce it. Maybe anti-government activities could be as simple as protesting on the streets against the government. Again, it's broad and it helps the government enforce it. Let's also look at the word suspicion. That is opposite of the word conviction. If you are convicted of something, there was a trial, a judge, and a jury, and there was enough evidence to find you guilty. This is not deporting people on the conviction of anti-government activities. It's just on the suspicion, right? So this is, of course, violating multiple amendments. It's violating the First Amendment for freedom of speech. All right, it's violating you could even say the Fifth and Sixth Amendment because there's no trial by jury in this case. So what does this essentially mean? If the government suspects that there's an alien in the country, meaning a non-citizen, like someone who's from France but living in the country, and they just suspect them of like not liking the government or plotting against the government, they can just pick them up and deport them back to France. That's it. No questions asked. It is, again, an extremely dark time in American history, and just a couple years after the Constitution gets set up, we see the Adams administration start to trample upon that Constitution a little bit out of fear. They wouldn't be the last to do this, all right? Now imagine you're a French family living in the U.S. who just immigrated here. Keep in mind, this could be any foreign citizen, not just, I keep using the French as an example, all right? You're going about your business. You might not have even done anything wrong. You might just have upset a local official for any reason, right? That local official can point to you and say, this person is under, I suspect that they're plotting anti-government activities. And then you could be deported. Does this sound at all familiar to anything we're talking about in literature? Yes, it has a little bit to do with McCarthyism during the Cold War and the Red Scare, where in the 1950s, Senator Joseph McCarthy was basically going around calling people he didn't like communists, even if they weren't. And people were so afraid of communists at this time that it cost a lot of non-communists their jobs. This is very similar to that, all right? People are being deported just for the suspicion of anti-government activities. So that's not good. And again, the point is to crack down. Government's worried that French citizens in the country are going to maybe start rebelling. And again, huge violation of rights. All right? Let's talk about the Sedition Acts. This made it illegal to write, print, utter, or publish any any false or hostile words against the U.S. government or its policies. This is aimed at United States citizens, right? So the Sedition Acts are mostly aimed at people like journalists, people like politicians, mayors, things like that, saying, hey, listen, normally you have the First Amendment, which says that, hey, if you're a journalist, you can write anything you want, you can have an editorial criticizing the government, no more. Under the Sedition Acts, you could be imprisoned, fined, jailed, for writing such things slandering the United States government. Obviously, this could be used at foreign people too, but keep in mind, the Alien Acts right here, not helpful toward United States citizens. This is really great at cracking down on all the aliens or foreigners or non-citizens living in the country. The Sedition Acts, this is how you crack down on actual American citizens. And again, violation, of course, of the First Amendment. Now, I should point out that the courts did uphold it at this time because they were so worried about this possible war with France. This is the problem with fear, right? We have nothing to fear but fear, except for when you fear the fear. Okay, so Sedition Acts make it illegal to write, print, utter, or publish false or hostile words against the government or its policies. So, sorry, newspapers, if you want to criticize these acts, you can't even do it. That's what's crazy about this whole thing. Normally when a law is passed, there's a debate about it that takes place in the public. Some people say this law is good, some say this law is bad, and arguably that debate, no matter how ugly it might get, is a good thing for this country. It's a good thing for democracy to have these debates. Well, right after these laws are passed, if you're a newspaper editor and you disagree with them, you can't even write about that because you could get prosecuted under the Sedition Acts. And again, why is the government doing this? You might want to write this down. The government is doing this to crack down on the opposition. All right? They're doing this to crack down on the opposition, to try to prevent a war with France, to try to prevent people from criticizing them for not going to war with France. The Adams administration, mostly the Federalists, are tired at seeming weak from the XYZ affair, and they are going to crack down. The idea being, if we don't control the citizens and non-citizens living in this country, then they will dictate what the country does about war or not war, and that's up to us. It's up to the government. I think the government has its ego bruised. Okay, let's talk about the Naturalization Act. This act increased the time it took for an alien or non-citizen to become a U.S. citizen from 5 to 14 years. That is a huge increase. That is a 9-year increase, all right? So, today, to become a United States citizen, if you want to be naturalized, you have to have been living in this country with a green card for at least 5 years. And the idea is, okay, you've been here legally with your green card for 5 years. Now we can start the process to make you a citizen. Well, this greatly increased that from 5 to 14 years. So, if you want to become a United States citizen at this time in 1798, you must have been living in this country legally, I should add, for 14 years. You might ask yourself, you might ask me even, Mr. Johnson, why would they make it so much longer? I mean, that seems like that doesn't make sense. Well, if you think about it, it does. This makes it easier to deport non-citizens or aliens under the Alien Acts, right? Keep in mind, you can't really deport United States citizens. You can arrest them, sure, but you can deport aliens. So what the logic behind this is this. Look, because of these Alien Acts up here, we can deport all non-citizens that we want for even if we suspect them of doing anything that is against the government. So, what do? The Naturalization Act. That means they're going to stay non-citizens or they're going to stay aliens longer. That way, we have more time to deport them. And I hope this makes sense. Because think about it this way. If you have an alien or a non-citizen and they become a United States citizen, the only thing you can punish them under would be the Sedition Acts right here. And yeah, you can jail them, you can fine them for speaking out against the government, but it's so much easier just to deport them. When you deport them, that's it. They're done. You don't have to pay to feed them in prison. So the Naturalization Acts, basically, it keeps these aliens longer, from 5 to 14 years. So you can just deport them, all right? It's a lot easier. And again, the government is doing this to crack down. It's hard to express at this time how much people were afraid. All right, people were a new country. We were really, really upset at France. A lot of people wanted war, but people knew that we weren't ready for war, and the government is doing this to crack down on opposition. This would not be the last time that governments would do this during times of war or almost war. We'll talk about that more later. So I hope this slide makes sense to you. Now it's time for a meme. Ha! Oh, that's a good one. It's funny because this guy, he's basically saying, I'll draw a little word bubble here, he's saying that the Alien and Sedition Acts are unconstitutional, which they were, and he gets deported, implying that he was an alien, he's a non-US citizen. So again, these acts are very, very dark in American history because it takes away the right of citizens to basically complain about their government, and non-citizens, right? The second these acts are passed, you cannot say you don't like them. If you are an alien, you could be deported for saying that. If you are a citizen, you could be fined or put in jail under the Sedition Acts. Alright, so it's funny. Hey, I got a few more things I want to say about this, the Alien and Sedition Acts. It should be noted that John Adams did not want to do this. I said this before, but he did this reluctantly. This was not his idea, but was pressured by his party. And it would end up being the biggest regret of his presidency. Years later, he went back and said in his memoirs, "I wish I didn't do that." John Adams knows this is wrong. John Adams knows this is trampling on the Constitution. But the Federalists and his party and his cabinet were saying, we need to do something to appear strong after the XYZ affair. So he reluctantly agrees to it. Yes, he is the president, but he did bow down to that pressure, and he wishes that he didn't. Thank gosh that this did not happen during the Washington presidency. Because remember, Washington's out there trying to prove that A, the Constitution works, and that B, the government will not trample the rights, the Bill of Rights, guaranteed in the Constitution. And he does a decent job of that. Then along comes Adams, and Adams is basically like, hey, amendments number 1, amendments number 5 through 7, get out of here. Because of course these acts violate some parts of the Bill of Rights. If you can be jailed, fined, or deported for speaking out against the government, that's going to be a First Amendment right. If you can be kicked out of the government, if you can be kicked out of the country on the suspicion of talking bad about the government or doing anti-government activities, that violates your 5th, 6th, and 7th Amendment rights because there's no trial by jury. You have no idea what you're being kicked out for. Okay, so Adams did this reluctantly. Now, there is a Republican response led by Thomas Jefferson, who is, keep in mind, the vice president at this time, and James Madison. And they write the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. They are called Virginia and Kentucky resolutions because Jefferson is from Virginia and Madison is from Kentucky. All right. Now, again, Keep in mind, Thomas Jefferson, he's the freaking Vice President of the United States, and he's going to write these resolutions basically saying, hey, my boss, the president, is a nut job. Now think about, this is why we don't have this system anymore where whoever came in second is the vice president. This would be like Mike Pence getting up right now and saying, Donald Trump is doing a terrible job handling the coronavirus. He's just doing an awful job. He's in denial. Again, this is not me saying that. This is a hypothetical situation where Vice President Mike Pence is saying that. Just saying. But of course, that hypothetical will never happen because vice presidents usually do whatever the heck the president tells them. So that's how you know, folks, this is a big, I'm not going to write out deal, it's going to take too long. This is a big deal because Americans are looking at this and saying, oh my gosh, our vice president is saying what our president is doing is unconstitutional. It gives people pause, all right? And basically the resolutions say, all right, here's what it says. Okay, I'm sorry. Let me catch my breath. The Virginia and Kentucky resolutions say that the Alien and Sedition Acts are unconstitutional because they went beyond the granted powers of the federal government and they interfere with the powers of state governments. All right? Again, they went beyond the powers of the federal government. The First Amendment says the federal government can make no law abridging freedom of speech. The federal government, you cannot imprison someone or deport someone without a trial. And of course, these go beyond that. They also take away policing powers. Policing powers are usually left up to the states. That's why states have their own police forces and National Guard. And the federal government is overstepping these lines. All right, that's essentially what they are saying. Now, the next president is going to be Jefferson, and under Jefferson, these acts are going to be repealed. Of course, Jefferson hates them, except for the Alien Act, which remains in effect today, although it's hardly ever used. It should be noted, though, that Japanese internment, which we talked about last year when the United States held all people of Japanese descent, even if they were U.S. citizens, against their will in internment camps during World War II. There was also lots of deportations and people being arrested during World War I for speaking out against the government. Many United States political leaders were arrested under the Sedition Acts as well for speaking out against the government during World War I, people who didn't want to go to war. There were many aliens in this country, including a famous person named Emma Goldman. She was against war. She was against World War I in this country, and she was deported under the Alien Act. So here's my point, folks. History matters. And these acts that were terrible and violated the Constitution, that were passed years and years and years and years and years ago, they still had negative effects on the country in as recently as the 20th century. All right? Both the Franklin Delano Roosevelt administration and Woodrow Wilson's administration during World War I looked back at the Alien and Sedition Acts to justify the things they were doing. FDR used that to justify interning Japanese people, and Woodrow Wilson during World War I used these acts to justify arresting people and deporting non-citizens for speaking out against the country. This is why what you do matters. The things that we are doing today, the things that the United States of America is doing today, will have a lasting effect on history down the road, because you never know who's going to get into power hundreds of years from now and point back to something we did now and say that was a precedent, and because of that precedent we can do these harmful things. That's why you must be very careful with history. You can never erase the past fully, and the legacy of the Alien and Sedition Acts are these two horrible things: Japanese internment and lots of people getting arrested and deported during World War I for speaking out against the war. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have for today. You're going to watch these two brief videos. This one's like a 2-minute video talking about the Alien and Sedition Acts. This one is from the HBO series John Adams. In the first scene, John Adams is being presented with the idea of these acts by his cabinet. John Adams doesn't like them, but he agrees to it. In the second scene, John Adams is hanging out with his wife, Abigail Adams, and they are reading newspapers who are criticizing him, all right? And in the third scene, John Adams is hanging out with his vice president, Thomas Jefferson. And these two guys, they were friends. They really were. They really disagreed on this. And you will see just how much Jefferson is against these acts in this video. Jefferson says, "John, you're trampling on the Constitution." And John says, "Well, what would you have me do, Thomas?" Thomas was like, peace, I'm going to Monticello. And it should be noted that Thomas Jefferson did say, a government big enough to give you everything you want is also strong enough to take everything you have. This is the danger when checks and balances are not enforced. In theory, the Supreme Court could have said these acts are unconstitutional and struck them down, but they did not. So Thomas Jefferson is saying, hey, it's great we have this powerful government that can give us all these freedoms. However, if the government giveth, the government can taketh away. Thomas Jefferson. Alright, folks, so make sure you watch those 2 other videos and do the homework assignment posted on Teams. I will talk to you, ladies and gentlemen, some other time. Take care and stay as safe as you can. Peace.